Okay, right. Well, let's get started. So, welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen. What we're going to do is get started with in a time-honored fashion, with a few introductions. Andy, why don't you get us started with some intros?
Yeah, no problem. Hi, everyone. My name's Andy McCarran. I'm the Managing Director at SBC. If you don't know SBC, it stands for Sports Betting Community. We've been going for properly for 6 years now. We run a series of news sites for the gambling industry and some of the wider sports industry, and also host a bunch of events when we can. Betting on sports, betting on football, Casino Beats Summit, SBC Summit, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel. Within our portfolio, we also have a business called Esports Insider, who also run a news website and do their own events as well.
Thanks, Andy. Ian, over to you, sir.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ian Smith, the Commissioner of the Esports Integrity Commission. I am a lawyer by training, but have been Commissioner of the Esports Integrity Commission since we were founded in the winter of 2015, formally launched in 2016, and we're a voluntary regulator for the esports industry based on a membership model of tournament organizers, and on the other side of that, betting operators with whom we cooperate on suspicious and unusual betting to inform our work to combat match fixing and other betting fraud related issues in esports.
Excellent. Thanks, Ian. Matt, your turn.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Philby. I'm the head of gaming at WhoYou. This is my 13th year working in the gambling sector. I'm a AML geek by background, but also a KYC and onboarding specialist. So thanks for joining us today.
And last but not least, Caroline, welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Newman. I am head of compliance at Midnight. If you don't know Midnight, we are a esports betting operator. And prior to Midnight, I was at Playtech.
Thank you very much for that, Caroline. And my name is David Pope. I'm the marketing director over at WhoYou. Self-confessed AML, age verification, and fraud prevention and customer onboarding geek. So welcome to today's panelists and experts. Thank you very much for being with us. So here's what we wanted to look at today. Obviously, really amazing time to be in esports. We'll talk through some of the stats of that in a minute. And in particular, we'll look at the success of esports when traditional sports betting markets are involuntarily paused. And then we'll move on to say, okay, what does it look like from a underage gaming and fraud risk in esports betting? And then what we really want to do is to examine what are the challenges to performing effective customer onboarding that's tailored to the esports betting demographic. And then Matt and I will finish up with a quick show and tell to talk about how WhoYou works with operators such as Midnight and Luckbox to deploy configurable, customized KYC and onboarding journeys. Do please throw your questions at us. We'll take Q&A at the end. Somewhere, depending on what computer or browser you're using, there'll be a funny little button for you to press to send questions to today's assembled experts. So do throw your questions at us as we go through today, and we'll take questions at the end. So let's get started. Let's have a look at the growth. So God bless the Gambling Commission. They published this a while back, and really it's an amazing story to say that esports betting grew by 2,922% GGY from March 2019 to March 2020, which is just huge, insane in any market. Then especially when you look at that compared to poker and other forms of gambling. So what we thought we'd do here is really examine where the growth is coming from, and of course this growth is before the cessation of sports betting markets when COVID really started to bite back in March. So guys, let's start with you, Andy. What's your take on these stats?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, Gambling Commission have just released a few more today, and as you say, in March 2019, the GGY was just over 50,000, and by March 2020, that was 1.5 million. So it does show the increase just in that time, and I guess it's more. Certainly from a gambling perspective, it's more visibility on esports. You've got more sports channels looking around for more content, of which esports tends to be it's something readily available, and it's something visual that it's easy to plug in, because a lot of these things a lot of these competitions are getting streamed anyway. So the more stuff's on TV, the more people are used to it, and the more likely they are to bet on it. But at the same time, it's also down to the bookmakers being more comfortable with the product and adding the esports markets to their own offer.
Brilliant. And Ian, what's your view? Tell us about what you've seen about the growth of the betting industry around esports in the last couple of years.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very interesting scenario because, of course, as we've seen by the graphics here, and he's right entirely right in what he said, is that we've seen phenomenal growth prior to COVID, but that, of course, produced in unfortunate circumstances a kind of perfect storm. But what I think it's worth making the point is that when we talk about esports, of course, it's the same as saying something like the Olympics. People don't bet on the Olympics; they bet on individual events within the Olympics. And just like the Olympics, esports has its big, its big products, like akin to the 100-meter men's final, and it has its small products akin to the round-robin stages of synchronized swimming or taekwondo, with very small niche audiences. And in the betting space, you're really talking about three absolute giant offerings in esports broadly, and that's the three games being Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, Dota 2 or Defense of the Ancients 2, and League of Legends, and then the rest, including, say, StarCraft 2, which used to be a very big betting product until some match-fixing scandals kind of killed it in South Korea back in 2015-16. And so we've really got to think about this in terms of those verticals. But all of those have been growing very, very steadily as betting products for the past 4 or 5 years. It's what's been really, really different in this absence of other content and entertainment is the growth in terms of both viewership and engagement through betting. And that's brought us into the world of sports simulator games. And I'm sure Caroline has more to say about Midnight's direct experience on this, but my bigger picture kind of experience of this is that for a good few months there, we saw a bunch of new, much more easily understandable products hit the market, with FIFA or Pro Evo Soccer, NBA 2K, Madden being American football, and E-Formula 1, E-Formula E, E-NASCAR. So all of these things that a normal, traditional sports bettor could look at and go, yeah, I understand that product, because it is equally true that looking at the traditional esports offerings, most people outside of the esports world would have no idea what they were really looking at, particularly with Dota 2 and League of Legends, which are very, very complex games. I think Counter-Strike is probably the one that benefited most of the traditional esports titles, because it's a relatively easy game to understand. So yeah, the growth has been phenomenal. It's just really the push into other areas and broader engagement that coronavirus pandemic has brought to the scene.
Yeah, and going to Caroline, do you think a lot of the growth has come from pure esports players like yourselves?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting looking at the data on the growth throughout lockdown, and the data on the subsequent months with the easing of the lockdown and live sport. So if I remember correctly, so full-blown lockdown started on the 23rd of March. The strict lockdown ended end of May, with live sports coming back in June. And looking at that kind of time scale, what we found is that in April and May, we've seen a surge in active accounts on our site. And then when we look into June, when the live sports reintroduced itself, we've seen a bit of a decrease, a bit of a dip for that month, but then we actually see it picking up again in July and August. And we almost see from September to now, it's starting to level off a bit.
I mean, that's interesting because from the official figures, the way you described it, it is this is for the UK. The way they've obtained these figures is they go to some of the bigger operators, which represent 80% of the market, so it's not entirely accurate. But they were saying that you know, in March it was 1.5 million GGR. April it went up to 3.4. Then May went up even further to 4.6. Then June down to 3.4 again, and then it's just started going back down. July it had it as just 2.6, and in August 1.8 million GGY. But August, a lot of sports betting just dropped anyway.
So that's
and I think Andy, you make a good point about who they're looking at there in terms of where they're getting their data, because of course that would exactly reflect the experience of big multi-sport sports books. It would certainly not be the general experience of the esports only online operators that like Midnight and like
exactly.
Fox.
So that kind of like begs an interesting question, a poll in fact, which we'll put to the audience. So what's going to happen now, dear listeners, is I'm going to press a little button at my end, and there's a poll going to appear on your screen. And if you could please give us your perspective and vote on the answer, that could be quite interesting. So bear with me for 1 second. So in a second, it's going to flash up on your screen. Will esports betting maintain its revenues now that sports betting has returned? So we'd like to get your views on that. So you should see that on your screen now. Okay, interesting. Okay, so we've got plenty of votes coming in. We've got 2/3 of you have voted, so I'm going to close the poll there, and let's share the results. Okay, so we're seeing, actually it changed in the last couple of seconds. It was more like 60-40 in favour of no, but it's a lot more evenly split now. This is like almost a referendum result. But 55% of people are saying that that sports betting won't maintain its revenues. So panelists, what do you make of this, guys?
Well, I guess that could reflect a bit of what Ian was just talking about there. It depends on how heavily wedded you are to the esports betting product, or if it's just a plug-in to all the other products you have. Because if it's like Caroline says, they've got a second wave, shall we say, of esports popularity betting. That maybe the bigger operators who've been late to the party aren't experiencing.
Yeah, Matt from Who what do you think on this one?
I actually think it will continue to grow. I think there's been a lot of media attention on esports betting because of lack of sports. I think I'm seeing clients that are investing quite heavily in their esports offering and product, either building their own or buying in capability and just trying to get the right content. I think a lot of the, I suppose, older, more traditional businesses are trying to hire talent in order to grow that segment. So I do think it will continue to accelerate.
Same. If I was voting, I think I would have voted yes. I think that meaty 2,922% GGY growth before sports betting got removed speaks for itself. And we'll look at some stats later on in the webinar as well that looks at how there might not be as much crossover between esports bettors and traditional sports bettors as one might think. So let me press a few buttons at my end, hide those results, and let's go back to our PowerPoint. Okay.
I mean, again, it's worth saying from March's figures to August figures, if you ignore the lockdown bit in the middle of it, there's still 20% growth there from March to August.
Yeah, I mean, I know plenty of industries that would take 20% growth in the good years, let alone with everything that's going on here. Okay, right. So let's move on. So now let's have a think about the underage gaming risks in esports. What we do know is that the demographic is younger. So let's have a chat about whether there is a higher risk of underage gambling in esports. Caroline, what's your view on this one?
Sure. So the demographic we find on Midnight is males aged between 18 to 30. And the difficulty with esports gambling, as opposed to other forms of gambling, is that esports can have a particular draw for under 18s. Some of the biggest titles, such as Fortnite, are popular games for under 18s to play. So it does carry a risk for exposure to the younger under 18s.
True. And is that reflected at all in the deposit mechanisms that you see? What's the kind of like ratios of debit card deposit to tools that the younger players might use, like wallets and that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. I shared the initial same thoughts that the younger demographic might be much more tech savvy, wanting to try the newer forms such as e-wallets, but we've actually found that majority still use their debit cards. And just to look in the last month, 86% of transactions were done by debit cards, whereas e-wallets we've only found 14%.
Okay, so that's quite interesting. I mean, that's quite interesting insight into payment behaviour on that demographic as well. Moving beyond the payment conversation to the KYC conversation, I guess this one's aimed at you, Matt. Really, is there a data gap for traditional database verification for an esports betting demographic?
I think it depends on the geographies. So certain countries, particularly Western sort of democracies, tend to have very strong data assets, either government data sets or credit-headed data, but there is still a gap because if I haven't registered to vote and I'm still living with my parents, I don't have a credit file as such, or I have a very thin credit footprint. It'd be very hard to verify me on data. In other markets, some of the government data sources aren't very good, or that their ability to match when they're sent a request by an operator to verify me are poor. We've seen big differences with some government databases, which, because of naming conventions in that country, are hard to verify. These are good players that are over 18. And so there is a widening gap with the requirement for documents to be able to onboard these guys safely. But I really think it depends on the geographies that you're in. But there is always a data gap anyway. But the younger people are, the less of a credit footprint they tend to have. And certainly in Western markets, a lot more people are living with family, aren't responsible for household bills or mortgages or even car loans if you're in a major city with good public transport. So you're going to have a harder time trying to verify them on just data.
Okay, and of course the big risk for operators is that just because it's a no match doesn't actually necessarily mean it is actually underage gaming. So Caroline, I think you've got a bit of a water flow. You've got quite a sophisticated process in place, haven't you, whereby you do data then ID document validation.
Yes, we do a combination of both. And with the electronic data verification, we actually categorize it in 3 different ways internally. So one will be no data match, where a customer has 0 matches electronically, and then a partial data match, which have some kind of match, but not as strong. And then we've got the full strong data match, and we've actually found that only 12% in the last month have been put into this category. And partial, we found the majority of the customers falling in at 67%, and 21% have no matches whatsoever.
Okay, that's great stats to get some real insight there. Thank you for that, Caroline. So that's the sort of, sorry, go ahead, Andy.
No, I was just wondering. I mean, if you're talking about a younger demographic that you're obviously appealing to, and you've got to make sure they're over 18 and everything. How open are they to sharing the data to help that process? Is it because young people are a bit more prepared to share the data because of everything they share on social media, or has it gone the other way where people are a bit more reluctant to perhaps send in those kind of details?
It's really interesting. Like you said, this generation are very open to sharing a lot of things on social media, and we see a lot of players understanding that it's a requirement to ask for these documents, and they're very, very compliant and cooperative. But we do find people who are a little bit more reluctant, and this could be perhaps due to the awareness and education around GDPR. It was such a big thing, with everyone being made aware of it, and the security around their data and information. So I think that may have had a big impact on how they view sending in documents.
So, and the reason, and you said they're happy to send some in once they realise what it's for, as opposed to a Cambridge Analytica issue.
Definitely. We really do value being transparent and explaining the reasoning behind it to our customers. And we also have an FAQ page that's been widely accepted and welcomed by our customers, just to explain what it is we're asking for and why.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think communication of the process is something that helps get the buy-in from the end user, let them know what they need to do. I think almost like a tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them approach is one that bears fruit there.
Most definitely. And sorry, and the tone and the language is so important in this kind of communication with our customers.
Yeah, and testing and optimization. It's all I think these days the companies that succeed, whether they be cool fintechs or clever gaming operators, it's all around really obsessing around the journey and playing around that journey and optimizing that journey, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, so that's a quick look at some of the data issues, the verification issues, the underage gaming issues. Let's have a chat about the fraud risk and esports betting. So what we really can't get at on today's call is there a higher incidence of card fraud in this segment? We don't really have any data points ourselves. We might put that to the audience in a minute. But Ian, let's go to you. If you could tell us about the great work that ESIC has been doing over the last few years to stamp out some of the fraud risks in esports betting. Let's see what you've got to say on this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. I think obviously I really can't talk to card fraud at all, so it's just as well this other side to the whole fraud risk on the betting fraud side, which obviously drives 92% of match fixing if you look at the official figures around this. And what we see in esports, in the position that we're in, is that we run an unusual and suspicious betting alert network that involves Midnight as well as about 24 other betting operators, both exclusively esports and, of course, broader sports betting sites that happen to also do esports as one of their verticals. And we also then cooperate with various regulators around the world, including UKGC, Nevada, New Jersey, State of Victoria, Malta, Isle of Man, and so on. And then the data companies. And so we've created a successful alert system out of all of these people who are looking at the data. And what it shows us really is two types of fixing, which will be very familiar to people in the integrity space on the betting side, but perhaps has some nuances that are unique to esports in a way. So I don't know the technical words for these. So I call the first is kind of opportunistic fixing, Mickey Mouse stuff around a team, a coach, a manager, a player, looking at a situation where, because there is a lot of low-level tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 esports with low prize money, lots of people trying to break into the higher tiers, and increasing number of markets at that level, that they look at the situation where quite often you could win, say, as an individual in a 5-member team, $400, $500, $600 for winning a particular match, but betting against yourself and throwing the match, you could win at an individual level again $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. And often in that sort of space, particularly with dead rubbers or meaningless one-off tournaments, that's the option some players choose. And of course, that comes to our attention, and we investigate and prosecute where we can. But we can only really do that where we have jurisdiction, which is, whether the tournament operator is a member of ESIC and running under our anti-corruption code. And then the other side, which will be much, much more familiar to the sportsbook operators, which is, what I would refer to as your classic match fixing, which is a better or betting syndicate fixing a match by bribing, coercing, persuading a player or team to participate in their fix, just like traditional sport. And we see both kinds, but what's happening over the last probably 2 years or so is it moving from being the vast bulk of fixing being in the opportunistic category, with a few classic match fixing cases. That is shifting. I would say it's nowadays kind of 50-50. And the reason for that primarily is, well, both the increase in markets, number of markets and value of markets. But the biggest thing is the accessibility of the players. Because one of the problems with fixing in traditional sport is, particularly at the higher level, is the inaccessibility of the participants. They are shielded. Whereas in esports, there's still a lot of ignorance allied with a very high social media presence and a lot of fan interaction. And all I'm saying there is it's actually really easy to get hold of these guys, which is not necessarily the case with traditional sport. So that makes a significant difference. So yes, we see a reasonably significant amount of attempted and actual betting fraud in esports, because frankly the lower end of the esports spectrum is very amateur, and I think a lot of operators take significant chances in the quality of data they rely on to offer markets. But there's such demand that they feel almost obligated to put them up for fear of losing their customers.
So when something a bit of a collusion is flagged up to you, Ian, and working closely with the bookmakers, I mean, how do you attach a suspect betting pattern from one account to the player? Is that the forensic way you link together a case?
Yes, exactly. And so obviously we're guided in the first instance by the betting evidence. We then look at the match evidence in conjunction with the betting evidence and say, is there reason to believe, is there evidence, albeit corroborating only, of that the players or player deliberately underperformed? And generally that's in some cases that's blindingly obvious, but with more sophisticated players, it's not as persuasive. And that always forces us to go to the next stage, which is to link the bettors with the players. Now, I would say that historically that's been surprisingly easy in esport because these guys are idiots. Yeah. So sometimes it's as simple as finding that their friends on Facebook went to the same school, in some cases are related or had relationships. It hasn't historically been particularly sophisticated, but it is becoming more sophisticated as the return on investment becomes more worth it for your classic match fixers. So yeah, I mean, our investigatory work is probably almost identical to the sort of thing that you would see the ICC anti-corruption unit or the athletics integrity unit or the tennis integrity unit do. The difference, I guess, is that we're dealing with a lot of data, of digital evidence. So in many ways, we have better evidence on the match side, on the playing side, than most of the traditional sports where you're relying on visual records. Whereas we have data, actual real digital data, where we in many instances can show that, for example, if you take a particular behavior in a game, we might be able to show that 93, 94% of the time the player does X in that circumstance, but in the game that we suspect of being fixed, he did Y. Again, that's corroborative evidence, but it's pretty helpful.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, that's such an interesting side. We can get into that for hours. Let's throw another poll to the audience. What we're looking for here is to see if anyone's got any views on whether there are higher or lower card fraud rates in esports betting compared to traditional sports betting. So let's get that poll going. Okay, so that should land on your screens now. Wow. Okay. Ooh. So this is a fantastic piece of data. This is very interesting. Let's close the poll and share the results. So overall, the minority of people are seeing higher card fraud rates. The majority of respondents are saying it's about the same. But there's actually more people saying there's lower card fraud rates in esports betting than there are higher card fraud rates. So guys, what do you make of this?
I think some of it is down to the fact that a lot of the values of deposit values are lower for a lot of the gaming products in esports betting, so potentially less attractive in some cases. And there's, I guess you've got different groups interested in different types of game, and it's I guess harder to predict sometimes the performance of an esports team in a particular tournament than it may be the form of a Premier League football team. But that much might just be me showing my age, but I think the deposit values I think are the main reason. So a lot of companies that we've talked to and work with, they offer quite often innovative product types like tote type betting, which don't lend themselves as well to fraud.
Okay.
I guess. Sorry, I was going to say. I mean, I wonder if some of it is also. I mean, Caroline was talking before about cards and e-wallets in the mix. I don't know whether in traditional sports you'd get a greater percentage of people using card for deposits anyway. So that would
skew it, yeah.
That would skew it that way. I mean, we were talking about younger demographics. I don't know if there's any view of whether those young people are using more types of payments or cryptocurrencies, or even some operators are allowing you to do payments by mobile phone. Certainly we found that out from Africa, from our Africa event last week. Caroline, you were saying Midnight don't take cryptocurrencies as it stands?
No, we don't. I think generally speaking, it's the latest and newest form of a payment method. And yeah, we don't offer this as a payment method on our site, and we think that it's still in its early infancy stages, in my opinion, when it comes to trading and paying with it. And the problem we find is that there's nothing that's been around longer that is similar to really compare it to. And from a general point of cryptocurrency, there are natural risks that come with it. So around the fact that it's unregulated, there's a huge level of anonymity behind it, and that combination makes it really challenging from an AML perspective for operators.
Sure.
Okay, cool. So thank you for that, guys. So now let's have a look at some of the stats about the demographics of your typical esports bettor. So thanks to LootBet for publishing this research. And we spoke earlier about the younger demographic. Caroline, you were saying how the majority of your players are male aged 18 to 30, so no great shocks here. But what I found really interesting in this research is the crossover, or to be more precise, the lack of crossover between esports and betting on classic sports, and esports and online casino. Does that bear true? With what you think about your pure esports customers, Caroline?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, sorry. So I was just saying, in terms of what this is saying here, the kind of the betting preferences of esports bettors, that they tend not to go off and bet on traditional sports or with online casino products. Just wondering, what your view on that is, and also same question to you as well, Andy.
Yeah, it's hard for me to comment on this because we only offer esports at the moment, so I've got nothing really to compare it to. So it's hard to say from my perspective, looking at the information I have from Midnight.
Sure. I mean, from a wider gambling industry, I mean, cross-selling has been one of the key skills for a successful company these days, and certainly where you find a lot of the casino brands, such as Leo Vegas, for example, they started off casino brands, and adding the sports side of things is because it was actually easier to attract new customers using sports and then flip them onto the casinos. But what you tend to find is if operators are finding out their existing customers are going elsewhere for a different gambling service, if enough of them are doing that, they will add it to their existing service and try and extend the lifetime value of that customer on their own site, rather than letting them drift away to another site, which may also offer the services that they're getting from your site. Obviously, it gets a bit complicated that way, but the longer you can get them to dwell on your own website, the more likely they are to spend their leisure cash on your products. And the thing is, with sports betting, it doesn't necessarily translate to casino gaming. The demographics are slightly different. Where there's always been a crossover with sports betting has actually been with poker rather than the online casinos. So traditionally, the demographic isn't quite there. So if you've got a firm that's just betting on esports, I can see why they've not plugged in their own online casinos just yet.
Yeah.
Can I add to that, Andy? In my experience, albeit anecdotal, but I do hang around with a lot of esports fans at live events when we used to have them. And
back in the day,
as such, I think, I think I understand this demographic, and I think that there are general propositions which everybody will understand in this. Is that firstly, with a few exceptions, most traditional sports are in decline in terms of that demographic interest in them as spectators, fans, even participants, right? So if you look at it generally, that applies to the demographic that are, broadly speaking, betting on esports. Secondly, my experience of these guys is they're fairly savvy bettors. They're not that kind of hot Saturday afternoon, slightly drunk punter. They bet on. They don't bet with their.
I think the term is recreational bettors.
That's what I mean, yeah. You know, but they're very stats and data driven head bettors. You know, and so gambling, your typical casino product is going to be very unattractive to most of these guys because they don't like the element of chance involved. I'm speaking very broad terms, but you understand, you know, the point I'm making, right? They're exactly the kind of person you can walk through a casino floor and not play slot machines because they understand slot machines. These are data-driven people. They know that they can't win, so they don't play them. Right? They don't have that same drive that drove a generation of people that still puts money in slot machines. And then finally, because there are so many products for entertainment, esports offers more or less 24-hour a day, particularly once you take gaming and streaming into account. And this is where our esports demographic lives. They don't watch TV, right? They don't consume traditional sports in the way that we might, you know, an older generation might, and so, you know, they're not exposed to the same adverts, they're not exposed to the same sport, and they don't like betting on stuff they don't understand, and all of that creates this, you know, where you look at that middle line on the graphic that's currently up there is they don't bet on it.
Yeah,
you know, they just don't, and I think that even more so with casino type gambling, offering it to them might get the odd.
No, I've lost.
oh, okay, we'll come back to him when we've got
to move. But broadly speaking, esports fans bet on esports.
Yeah, cool. Ian, we lost your signal very briefly there, but let's just
I was rambling on.
No. Let's get through to the end, and then we can take some questions. So now let's just have a look about the challenges of designing that customer onboarding experience to the esports demographic. So we spoke earlier about the fact that there's a lower database match rate. We spoke earlier a little bit about the attitude to the online verification process, and we already spoke actually a little bit about educating and guiding them. So Matt, I'm going to turn to you to share your views on how HooYu works with operators. You know, so Midnight use HooYu, Luckbox use HooYu. Can you give us a brief overview of the HooYu approach and how that really gels with the esports?
So I think the most important thing is to make sure you've got the best user experience. So it's easy to go and ask someone that's taking out a mortgage to send you documents and upload document images because they've got a real motivation to do it. But when you're onboarding players for any segment, you're going to have to sort of gently nudge them through the process. So if you can make that initial interaction easy and guide them gently with a set of tools as to how to capture that ID card image correctly, or capture that utility bill or document that's needed for source of funds, source of wealth, you're going to get higher completion rates. And that's what HooYu and our Identify platform are all about. And certainly with the esports betting businesses we've worked with, it's been important that what's presented looks and feels like their brand, that we're not asking people to do things that are difficult to do, that it's easy for them to come in and out of that process when they have those documents available. So our whole approach is the ability to present a customized, easy to use user experience on any device, whether it's mobile or online, and to be able to guide that person to provide the identity document or the proof of address that they need, and in the background carry out the checks that the gambling company needs to do to make sure that they're compliant. So that could be looking at PEPs and sanctions in the background on the individuals. It could be just ensuring that the IDs aren't fraudulent, that we're looking to identify security features, which we do with technology. It might be representing a payment card back, so a debit card back to the player when there's a withdrawal or a big payout, just part of a enhanced due diligence journey or process. What we try to do is have a wide range of tools and then allow somebody that's in, say, Caroline's position to make a risk-based decision on what they want to do when. Obviously, a new player with a small deposit, you're going to treat differently to an established player that's exceeding AML thresholds. So you need that flexibility. What we're essentially doing is enabling the creation of what we would term a journey, which means that we're able to offer the right tools at the right time. And if somebody hasn't got what they need when they receive that link to upload their ID, the driver's license, we will gently nudge them with a personalised message from the operator, either by text or email, allowing them to go back in and complete that journey and that process. So we're delivering much higher completion rates over traditional document upload processes that have been in the market for a long time. And we're also able to allow the operator to see at all times where all these verification journeys are. So all the requests that have gone to the players, you can monitor in real time, see which ones haven't completed. You may set a time frame on them and set different risk rules in the background. And when you want to automate processes normally done by people, where you're trying to capture more information, so you might need to get a source of wealth information like a payslip, we're also able to do that. So we can create tailored journeys and messaging to help people understand, as Caroline said, in terms of the messaging, why you're asking for that, and why we'd appreciate it if you did that, and making it as easy to do. So it's smooth user experience for the player, ease of use. So if we make it easy to capture something, they're more likely to do it. If we make it simple to understand, they're more likely to do it. And if we send it to them at the right time of day, they're more likely to do it.
Brilliant, Matt. Thank you for that. So we're getting towards the end of today's session. It's probably time for us to start to take a few questions. Please do throw your questions at us through the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll take those questions. We've had quite a few come in already. So let's have a look. So Andrew has asked, is there any granulated data on age demographics? For example, of the 64% of esports bettors who don't bet on classic sports, does that swing more towards the 18 to 25 demographic than, say, the 25 plus demographic? Sadly, we don't have those cross tabs, but Andrew, I think you probably hit upon a good idea for a research project there. That's something that Who You might take on. So thank you very much for that. So here's a question. This is probably a good one for you to take, Caroline. Someone called Steve has asked if it's. He's basically saying, I thought it was GEC licensing conditions and codes of practice to confirm age before deposited funds can be used to gamble. I think that's my understanding of it. Can you just confirm that for us, Caroline?
Yes. Players need to be age verified with their address verified as well before they can proceed with depositing, betting, anything like that.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for that. It's probably a question for you, this one, Matt. How does Who You work? Does Who You work for non-UK documents?
Yeah, in fact, the majority of the business that we do in the gaming side of things is international. Obviously, we're a UK business, but an awful lot of the operators we work with in Malta, UK, Gibraltar, Isle of Man, etc., they're very much focused on growth markets. So the whole concept behind Who You is end-to-end. So we have machine learning technology, and we also have document analysts, so experts, who can manually view documents if required to get completion. So yes, it's a global solution for global documents, and the majority of the documents we process in gaming are not UK.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Question from David. This one looks like it's could be a good one for you to answer, Caroline. So David's saying, if the esports audience is not exposed to traditional media, what means do esports operators find most effective to attract and recruit new players? That might be a slightly unfair question to throw at you, because you're not on the marketing side of the house. You're very much on the compliance, but yeah, over to you to decide if you can answer that.
Yeah, it's very much our marketing department's forte here.
Yeah.
But I think with you know, social media, but we have to be very careful, obviously, with marketing on social media, and other kind of websites that we do find esports fans going on to. And yeah, that's all I can really kind of elaborate on. Like I said, it's more the marketing team's
Yeah.
strength in this.
Sure. Ian, what would your answer to that be? You've probably got quite a good view across the industry, how the esports betting operators are doing their acquisition.
Yeah, look, it is traditional in the sense that it looks at event or team sponsorship like anybody else. I just think that the opportunities are wider. So there's an opportunity in esport that is very hard to replicate in traditional sport, of creating your own league or tournament, because there's a lot of white label tournament operators, organizers out there who will put together, from literally turnkey solution for, what is in effect your event. And so, yeah, you're looking at, pretty traditional ways of acquiring. I think that they haven't quite reached the point of marketing being aimed at taking existing customers from other operators. We're still in that new customer sort of space. And so you look at prominent players, teams, and event sponsorship, and then you get into the social media, which does again offer slightly, I would say, better opportunities, in as much as the fans are probably more engaged in social media than traditional sports fans. But then, traditional sport has much higher social media reach in terms of numbers, but then that makes acquisition by that route very expensive. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts on that front. But as Caroline's mentioned, I get a lot of queries, in a sense, from a compliance point of view, from teams, players, tournament operators, asking me what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And whilst, I have a legal background and I've worked in the space for a long time, I'm not exactly an expert on these things, but I do know that promotion of gambling and advertising sponsorship on social media is a pretty fraught area, because it's very hard to restrict geographically. So you've got different laws applying to every tweet and Facebook post and Instagram post. So I think it's a pretty fraught world, that side of things. But yeah, otherwise it really revolves around traditional sponsorship. And you come back to the word that I hear most often in this space over and over and over again, and I've seen it in practice, is you have to be an authentic part of the industry. So it isn't just a case of coming along and saying, hey, we've got the best odds and we'll pay out. People need to feel that you're engaged in and interested in esports and them. That authenticity is very, very important. And it's still at this early stage of engagement with new customers.
Yeah, to maximise the conversion, prevent the churn, that sort of thing. So let's finish on one final panel question. As we were prepping the webinar, we kind of thought it would be good to ask this final question all around gambling harm and social responsibility. So I'm just going to throw this final poll on the screen. And what we'd ask, like everyone on the webinar today, to say is to basically tell us if they think that customers aged 18 to 24 should have deposit limits restricted until affordability has been proven at the individual customer level. So I'm going to throw that poll at you guys, and it'll be very interesting to see what we get back. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. Once upon a time, I wouldn't have expected this result, but I think that's where the industry is headed. And so the answer is an overwhelming yes. So 77% of people think that yes, affordability should be restricted until deposit limits should be restricted until affordability has been proven. I think size of the fines, the pressure, the media effect is really, really driving that. I think 3-4 years ago, I don't think we would have got that answer. But you know, I think that's very interesting. That just is a barometer of where as an industry we are now. So so Matt and Caroline, I know you were quite interested in this question. What's your view on the results?
Yeah, I agree with the majority. I think, like you've mentioned, that the fines and the regulators cracking down on the affordability, particularly the Gambling Commission, I think it's a sensible approach. Obviously, it's a sensitive area to kind of meet in the middle with the commercial team, but I think it's, from a compliance perspective, I think it's a very sensible approach.
Okay, cool. So that kind of brings us to the top of the hour. I would like to thank today's panelists very, very much. And Andy, I guess over to you to leave us with a few words of wisdom, a bit of a summary of today then.
Bit of words of wisdom. Well, that's you shouldn't ask a journalist for those.
No pressure, mate.
But no, it's I think you find it's a very interesting conversation we've had, and how in some ways esports is a totally different subset from the rest of the industry, but at the same time has a similar kind of trends. It's just that the fact that the audience at the moment skews younger. The growth figures show you know, it's not something that's going to go away, and it's going to become more and more popular. And obviously, as the demographics, as the sports itself get older, then there's going to be more and more people watching it and wanting to bet on it. So it's only going to become a stronger part of the gambling industry. And it's something that Ian mentioned. You've got to care. You've got to be an authentic part of it. It's like Midnight dedicating themselves to esports and speaking that language. It's only the same thing for if you're having a bet on a football match and somebody gets one of the team names wrong, it automatically puts you off. So if you want to make the most of the opportunity there from esports, you've got to embrace it and get into it and cater for that audience.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your summation. Nice one, Andy. Thanks again. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Matt. And we'll all see you again on another Who You webinar some point later this year. Cheers, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.